Over the last 30 years, 40,000 people in the UK claim to have been taken by extraterrestrials or had experience with UFOs. The following are two of the many such cases. Northamptonshire, England. The first story took place in southern England, November the 22nd, 1978. 50-year-old Elsie Oakinson left work at around 5:15 p.m. and she left the town of Daventry in West Northamptonshire in southern England and decided to drive home. And when she arrived at the village of Weedon Beck, she turned right onto the A5 and saw a brilliant red light on the left-hand side above the road, followed by a brilliant green light on the other side. Her initial thoughts were that it was an aircraft which was going to fly over her head and crash. But she soon realised the two lights were attached to a grey dumbbell-shaped object which was above the road. She estimated that the object looked to be about 50 feet wide and was about 100 feet above the road. She continued on her journey and drove underneath the object. She then continued her journey to Church Stowe in Northamptonshire, where she lived. As she looked back, she could see the object was still there, and its lights were flashing green and red. She came to a part of the road that was covered with trees, and she remembered driving under the trees, but didn't remember driving out. Suddenly, the car was stationary, and everything around her was pitch black. She didn't know where she was, and she knew she was in the car because her hands were on the steering wheel, but she could not see the road, the trees, or any buildings. She could see absolutely nothing, not even the car. She sat there and wondered where she was, but she wasn't afraid. Suddenly, a brilliant white circle of light about 3 feet across shone onto the road to the side of the car, then swished off before everything went black again, and then another circle of white light, exactly the same as the one before, shone down in front of the car. The light then switched intermittently on and off in a circle round the front of the car, and then went back in a semicircle, continuing to switch on and off to a side of the car, before shining onto a cottage on the side of the road. The light went to the front of the cottage. Elsie then realised that the light had come from above and was completely circular. She couldn't see anything and didn't know why they'd come or where they'd come from. She suddenly found herself driving about 30 yards down the road, just as she'd been doing under the trees. Her journey had taken 30 minutes, where it should have taken her only 15 minutes. Somewhere along the way, she'd lost 50 minutes of time. When she finally arrived at her house, she pulled into the drive and noticed that the kitchen light was on, indicating that her husband John, a policeman, was at home and was preparing the evening meal. When Elsie got inside, she said to her husband that he wasn't going to believe the story, before running upstairs and looking out of the bedroom window to see if she could catch a final glimpse of whatever it was that had been out there, but also knew that something odd had occurred. Elsie worked at the Daventry Teacher Training Centre, and the following day she mentioned to a number of her colleagues about the strange events. One of the people there suggested that she may have seen a UFO and that she should report it to the authorities. Elsie was unfamiliar with the term UFO and knew absolutely nothing about the field of ufology, but she soon would. Her eyewitness account of what she'd seen appeared on the news, and on Friday the 24th, the Elsie Oakinson case featured in the Northamptonshire Chronicle and Echo. Oakinson subsequently underwent hypnosis and went on to describe what had actually happened that night. Two figures appeared that looked grey against the glow, and she called them ghost-like beings because she didn't know how else to describe them. It was like a ghost with a head on top and a kind of body and tail that seemed to come towards her before going away and was no longer there. Then another figure came to the other side of the light. It looked like a person with a sheet over its head. There was the head and arms and feet, and she thought of it as being another ghost-like shape. She found the palms of her hands were becoming very warm and her fingers started tingling. She went on to describe how she left work to drive home and saw a brilliant red light over one side of the road and a brilliant green light over the other side of the road that was attached to something grey. She thought it was an aircraft that was very low, but as she got closer to it, found that it was actually stationary. It was grey smooth and plastic looking and looked perfect against the darkening sky. It was a dumbbell shape with two bright lights underneath. She had no idea what the object was and had never seen anything like it. It wasn't an airship, a helicopter or an aeroplane, and she felt no fear, just curiosity and strangeness. She got back into the car and drove further along the road, but a car which had been serviced that day before suddenly malfunctioned. She changed from second gear to third, but instead of going faster, the car was slowing down before coming to a stop. The light had completely disappeared, and she couldn't see the road, the trees, or any buildings. She could see absolutely nothing at all, not even the car she was sitting in. She suddenly saw a circle of brilliant white light, and then that light went out and darkness returned. Then circles of brilliant white light shone in a pattern on the ground from left to right, and she looked through the windscreen to see where they could have come from, but everything was black. Then she suddenly found herself driving towards home. Elsie Oakinson was either abducted or was about to be abducted, but she never described what had actually happened to her, or whether she was taken aboard a craft. One theory she put forward was that she believed that she may have been rejected because of her age. Elsie later became involved in UFO movements, where she joined a witness support group to help counsel people who had undergone similar experiences. She also became interested in psychic phenomena. Dorset, England. In September 1990, James and Pamela Marilyn were camping in Dorset in southwest England. At around 3 a.m, James suddenly woke up and noticed a number of orange balls of light dancing in the sky in the field next to them. He quickly woke up Pamela to point them out to her. The couple found the orange balls hypnotic, and James quickly grabbed his camera and jumped out of the tent in order to take a photo of them. Neither James or Pamela were very clear about what happened next. When James returned to the tent, he believed he had only been away for a few minutes, but then noticed a pile of cigarette butts at Pamela's feet. They both decided to check their watches and found that the time was now 5:40 a.m. Somehow they'd lost 2.5 hours. Later that day, they had a vague recollection of what had happened to them, where James was able to recall an incident where he was lying on his back on something cold. He is in a circular-shaped room as being attended to by a man wearing white robes. He did not know what the man was doing to him, but somehow felt that it was something beneficial. Could it be that James was the only one to be abducted, as Pamela waited for his return while smoking, hence the cigarette butts, though it appears that she did not remember smoking them? It is strange that James was able to recall some of the abduction, but Pamela had no recollection of anything other than the orange lights in the sky. If you're enjoying this video, don't forget to hit like. It really helps to keep the channel growing. And if you're new here, subscribe and tap the bell icon so you never miss our latest videos. We've got lots of strange and fascinating stories coming up, and we'd love to have you along for the journey.
The most commonly reported experience of a healing episode involving a humanoid alien usually occurs with the witness waking up in their bedroom at night to see one or more strange figures standing by. The usually terrifying healing will then take place, or the person will be somehow transferred to a more clinical setting inside the extraterrestrial's craft. However, astonishingly, there are also on record multiple reports of alien doctors somehow entering a hospital patient's room and performing the healing procedure within the very hospital. Here we continue our Friend or Foe series by documenting some of those strange in-hospital cases. Lucky sighting. An in-hospital alien healing that took place in 1966 has been attributed to the patient's advanced work in electronics. As we've seen in earlier videos, aliens often help humans whom they believe help other humans. This account was uncovered by UFO researcher Paula Johnson. A precursor to the incident took place on Easter weekend 4 years prior in 1962, when electronics specialist Fred White went fishing near Durham in England. While he was fishing, he observed close up a metallic craft with portholes. Fred later reported that he could clearly see a human-like figure inside the craft, and that after about 5 minutes, the UFO departed the area. For some reason, Fred definitively linked this sighting to an astonishing encounter 4 years later, in September 1966. It was at this time that Fred was hospitalised when he was experiencing severe chest pains, which were diagnosed as related to a collapsed lung. Fred had no idea what was wrong with him and felt dismayed and concerned when X-rays soon revealed that he had a large hole in one lung. While an inpatient in the hospital, Fred was visited by a man whom he assumed at first was just another member of the medical team. However, this doctor had several strange characteristics. He spoke with a peculiar accent, and when he entered Fred's room, he immediately placed his arm over him as if examining him. Fred also noticed that the man was wearing an unusual kind of watch, which he said glowed like no other timepiece he had ever seen. He says that the two of them started to discuss Fred's symptoms. Then, strangely, the man digressed to express interest in Fred's work in electronics. After several minutes, the quirky doctor left, and immediately after his departure, Fred reported that he felt better and could breathe without pain. The other doctors gathered around and decided to run more tests, which included more X-rays. To their surprise, no hole could be detected in Fred's lung, and he was given a clean bill of health. One of the astonished medicos told him that his lung was now completely inflated and that the hole they had observed in there was healed. He said that he and his colleagues had never before seen anything like his miraculous recovery. Fred White remained convinced that the man or humanoid who attended to him in hospital cured his illness, and also suspects he was the same being he saw inside the UFO while fishing 4 years earlier. Manted surgeons. The following gruelling account was anonymously reported to UFO researchers in British Columbia in Canada. A woman going by the name of Andrea, not her real name, reported that in 2008 her best friend had been brutally attacked and left to perish alone. She had barely survived the incident, where she had lost consciousness and suffered multiple head injuries. When Andrea visited her at the hospital, she was unrecognisable, her lovely face swollen to the size of a basketball. Andrea had been close to her friend for over 40 years, the pair having grown up together, and was devastated that she now lay in a hospital bed in a drug-induced coma. Part of her friend's skull had been removed to reduce pressure from inflammation. Due to the delicacy of her condition, Andrea was told by the doctors not to touch her friend, and so she would stand by her bed and meditate on healing her, something that she already had some experience in doing. However, her friend's condition did not seem to improve, and Andrea began to feel despair and helplessness. She finally reached a point of panic where she felt a sense of urgency and that something had to be done quickly to save the woman. Andrea reported that it was at that moment that 2 praying mantis-type creatures appeared in the hospital room. Suddenly, the 2 beings appeared next to her friend, seeming to push Andrea aside, and started to work on the patient like skilled surgeons. She said that they stood to the left of her friend, standing together and working furiously on her. Andrea had no idea who they were or what they were doing. She was just aware that they looked like praying mantises. She added to her statement, "Never in a million years could I make this up." She had no idea that other witnesses had ever reported similar mantid-type extraterrestrials. She focused on her friend, watching as the mantids sliced her head perfectly open and busily began removing pieces of bone, rock or whatever from her brain. The 2 alien praying mantises worked quickly without speaking one word. At this point, Andrea remembers blacking out and then nothing more about the incident. When she told her friends what she had seen, they informed her that others had also reported similar mantid-type beings, which she later confirmed on searching the internet. She hoped that following the ET's visit, her friend would be completely cured, but sadly she only survived for another 2 weeks. Andrea felt it remarkable that her friend survived for any length of time with her injuries and will never forget the encounter, which she swears is 100% the truth. It also illustrates that despite their advanced healing technology, even the ETs are not perfect and unable to cure all injuries. Light therapy. Russian researcher Sergei Balantsev reported on this strange ET doctor encounter. It took place on the evening of April 18, 1989, when a woman who was terminally ill with heart disease was lying in her hospital room in Krasnoperekopsk in Crimea in Ukraine. She later related that a strong wind entered and disturbed her room, after which a dazzling white light appeared. This was followed by the appearance of a man dressed in white, an apparent humanoid whose eyes radiated light. The patient asked the man where he was from, and he replied, "The 10th dimension." The being told the woman that she would soon be able to walk again, and then he reportedly disappeared. The following day, other surrounding witnesses actually observed unexplained red and white lights moving slowly over the body of the woman. They said that they then heard a loud voice instructing her to get up and leave. The woman arose from her bed and left the hospital, having been apparently cured. The presence of outside witnesses to ET healings is very rare, so that this incident is a unique example of a healing that was observed by people around the patient. Life-saving abduction. The following mystifying account was reported to retired US Air Force Major cum UFO researcher George Filer, who is now a MUFON director. The events around this person's account occurred during the 1990s, wherein a woman named Joni Ferris believes that her contact experience saved her life. She had been in hospital battling pneumonia for 6 weeks, and the medical treatment being provided was simply not working. She was aware that the specialists were trying multiple forms of antibiotics and penicillin one after another on her without any success. She then had the astounding experience of being taken up through the ceiling and then blacking out. When she was returned and came to, she found herself back in her hospital bed and that her fever had broken and the pneumonia was gone. According to the record of Joni's account, she had apparently felt compelled to come forward and report her experience after reading a quote from researcher Jacques Vallée, who had described procedures done on humans by ETs as sadistic. She disagreed with his characterization and now believes that there are both positive and negative effects of alien abduction. While there are many accounts of humans being hurt by their abduction experience, as someone who greatly benefited from her encounter, she believes they are no more sadistic than an emergency medical team performing a life-saving operation.
The astonishing extraterrestrial UFO crash near Roswell in New Mexico may have occurred 72 years ago, but end-of-life disclosures are only now starting to piece together the real story. Here is an update. Researcher Don Schmidt has devoted many decades to investigating what is now called the Roswell incident. Witnesses who for years declined to comment on the phenomenon are now feeling freer to speak, or have informed their children of the truth before passing away. 3 extraterrestrial craft, described by the press of the time as flying discs, crashed near Roswell in 1947. Their wreckage debris and the remains of their pilots are now thought to be stored deep inside Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio. Employees at the base were at the time threatened with instant dismissal from their military jobs, $200,000 fines and 20 years in prison if they disclosed what they had seen and experienced. While these first and second-hand witnesses are many in number, 2 stories stand out as devastating reminders of how deadly serious the government was and still is about the UFO cover-up. Marion Magruder. In his book UFO Secrets, co-authored with Thomas J. Carey, Don Schmidt talks about Lieutenant Colonel Marion Milton Magruder, who had been an ace fighter pilot and squadron commander during World War II. Magruder was famed for his fierce night fighting in theatres of war and went on to become highly decorated. In 1947, he was one of the elite few chosen for advanced military training at the Air War College in Montgomery, Alabama. In April 1948, the class was flown to the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, on the understanding that the military wanted the officers' feedback and guidance on matters of critical importance. The men were led into a room where they were told about the recovery of an interplanetary spaceship and shown some of the strange wreckage. Magruder later related to his children his handling of a bizarre substance which he described as metallic cloth, now called memory metal. The substance was like very light and strong foil, which could be scrunched into a ball and when released would resume its original flat form. It also withstood soldering, always recovering its original shape. Some of the mysterious debris was inscribed with markings like hieroglyphics. It would be another 25 years before Magruder could bring himself to describe to his children what really shocked him. The men were told that there was a survivor from the crash and were led into another room where they encountered what he described as a living creature. His description accords with that of other witnesses of the alien being, except that Magruder observed that its rubbery skin had a flesh colour tone. Unlike the deceased beings whose skin had been described as greyish, this alien was alive. Its thin humanoid frame was about 4 feet tall, with an oversized head. There was a thin slit for a mouth and small holes for nostrils and ears. The large, wide-set eyes also accorded with the descriptions of other witnesses, and, like other witnesses of the living alien entities, Magruder felt that he could communicate telepathically with this being, and felt overwhelmed with empathy for the stranded creature. Relating the experience to his children, he teared up with sorrow and shame when recounting that the lonely extraterrestrial had later passed due to the numerous tests performed on it by the authorities. Marilyn Monroe. In the 1950s, tenacious journalist Dorothy Kilgallen wrote of the vital importance of understanding the UFO phenomenon and the small men who piloted them, reporting on an inspection of flying saucer wreckage leaked to her by a British government contact. It's little wonder then that Kilgallen was the person contacted by Hollywood actor Marilyn Monroe and promised a story that would rock the world. In his documentary Unacknowledged, Dr. Stephen Greer uncovers a top-secret wiretap of an August 3rd, 1962 telephone call between Kilgallen and a friend, which outlines Monroe's discontent and what she'd had to reveal. Monroe had been attending elite parties and claiming that she had secrets to tell. It was assumed that this insider information had been gleaned from her liaisons with brothers President John Kennedy and Attorney General Robert Kennedy. The secrets included the President's visit to an unknown Air Force base for the purpose of inspecting things from outer space. The crash debris and alien bodies were still being stored at Wright-Patterson Airport, so with her background knowledge, Kilgallen assumed that Monroe was referring to evidence of the Roswell crash of the late 1940s. She stated to her friend that if Monroe's claims were substantiated, it would cause horrible embarrassment to the President, who planned to send astronauts to the moon. The wiretap records show that Monroe was angry with the Kennedy brothers for ignoring her, and had threatened to call a press conference and reveal what was then highly classified information, with the shattering news that we are not alone in the universe. One day later, Monroe, aged 36, met her untimely end in suspicious circumstances, seemingly a victim of having been told too much for her own safety, and her own innocence of how ruthless those in power will become when their agenda is threatened.